I think people need to get away and they need to get experience someplace else.
If you're the next generation with plans of taking over the family ranch, or you have goals of having your own ranch someday, being a first-gen rancher, you're going to want to stop and listen to this episode. And if you're a current generation that is managing or owning the ranch, stop and listen to this episode as well. Generational transition or first-gen ranchers is a huge issue for our industry. Today, Allan Crockett talks about what is vital if there is a chance for successful transition or successful startup. From changing your mindset to,
I would rather have honesty and try to teach competency than have competency and try to teach honesty.
and understanding the economics of running a ranch. What does the foundation look like for someone that desires to be a next-gen rancher? That's on today's episode of the Working Ranch Radio Show. And we welcome you to another edition of the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm Justin Mills. Glad to have you tuned back with us here on today's program. Yeah, as you heard there in the opening, Allan Crockett is back with us again. I always enjoy visiting with him as always, and today's show is going to be no different in terms of what I think is going to be very valuable and useful information coming out of it for you all listening out there here today. Want to also remind you that coming up later in the show, Aaron Booth with New Holland will be in and joining us. Yeah, it's that time of the year where some of that equipment's getting put back in the barn, and before you do that, or as you're doing that, maybe it's the time to be looking at replacing oil and lubricants and doing things like that, and regular maintenance that needs to be done, not only on that equipment, also even that equipment that we're going to be running through the wintertime as well. So a great conversation with Aaron that we'll have later on in the show. And then, of course, don't forget to tune in as meteorologist Don Day will be in with this week's edition of our long-term weather. And, of course, the Captain Tim will burn in for this week's edition of Tim's 2 Cents. But back with us this week again is a good friend of mine, Allan Crockett, who is a ranch consultant and a business coach. We had him on just a couple of weeks ago. And Allan, good to have you back here on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Thank you, Justin. Good to be with you again.
Well, I know when we wrapped up that show, I said, I've still got some things I'd like to visit with you about, and this is kind of an extension of that show. Now, that one, of course, specifically is kind of getting a reset and starting over and how you can manage that. But we also started talking and looping in that conversation the next gen, and I'm going to call it the next gen ranchers that are out there. That could be anywhere from those that we're talking about here today, those graduating from high school all the way to maybe graduating college and just getting started in ranching is who we're going to talk to a bit today. But at the same time, as I had mentioned to you before we started on air here today, I also want mom and dad to be listening in as well, because I think there's some subjects that we're going to talk about or some conversation we're going to have here today that is relevant for them to understand too, where juniors at in all of this. So let's go back to the initial question that I've got here and your thoughts when I say, what would make me as the next gen rancher a better operator in the future?
Leave. That was worse for you, but not, go someplace else and get some experience someplace else for a couple of years. And that can be across the state. It can be a state away, a couple of states away. I mean, it could be a nation away. I mean, you can go to southern Mexico, go to Australia, or go someplace and get some experience where people do things different than the way they are done in your area. Because anytime we look at places geographically, there's kind of an unspoken set of rules that this is the way we do things here. Whether that's southern Arizona or whether that's Wyoming or Alabama, it doesn't make any difference. But geographically, we all have the tendency to kind of do things the same way in a geographic location. Whether that's how much hay we feed, whether that's when we calve, how we manage our grass. And so I would encourage people just to leave and get away and go someplace else and get some different experience. I worked with some clients a few years ago, and prior to me working with them, there were brothers and their partnership is split up, and it split up over that very thing. A couple of the brothers were insistent that any of their kids that wanted to come back to the place had to go someplace else for a minimum of 2 years before they even be welcomed back into the business. And then there had to be a position for them. And one of the other siblings thought, no, they should be able to come back anytime. Their family, and we're going to let them come back, and we'll make a position for them. And I don't agree with that. I think people need to get away, and they need to get experience someplace else, see kind of the way other ranches or farms or businesses are run in other areas. And then if and when there's an opportunity, then come back, but make sure it's the right opportunity and it's the right fit.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that in that particular example, I've got two questions. When you use that example that you talked about with those two, your client and the two brothers, do you think 2 years is enough?
I think that's a minimum. maybe it should be 2 years on 2 or 3 different places.
Yeah.
Because you think about it, Jess, we could have the discussion about going to college or not, or whether a college education, you really get educated, or if it's a waste of time, I won't go there.
Yeah.
But whether you're out of high school or you get a 2-year degree or you go to some ranching program at some university or something, there's some good ones out there. But in either of those circumstances, I think it is wise to get away. And if my kid went to work for you for a couple of years or vice versa, and then went someplace else for a couple of years and maybe 4, 5, 6 years, and going to those places, not with the intention of, hey, I'm going to make a career here. I'm here to learn how you do things and understand why you do things the way you do things. And whether that's grass management, whether it's some kind of rotational grazing, whether it's a specific breed of cows in a breeding program, or whether it's not even cows, whether it's running yearlings or, doing sell-by marketing or whatever it happens to be, but learning something in a different geographic location with people that are doing things different, and then come home with the blinders off, so to speak, and being able to see things at home in a different way than what mom and dad have seen them, or that grandpa and grandma saw them, and not that what they saw or the way they do things is wrong. I'm not indicating that at all, but just see things different, and different opportunities, different perspectives will provide different opportunities for people.
Mm-hmm. We're kind of talking a little bit there, as our last conversation here has been a little bit about maybe kids graduating high school or graduating college. What about this, maybe a young couple that has graduated, they've maybe worked a couple ranch jobs, but yet for them, what do you think would make them better managers as they look down the road?
I think getting experience with somebody that is a good manager, learning, as you know, I used to teach the ranching for profit school. I'm no longer involved there, but to me, that's a good school, and it's been called the business school of ranching. So learn some business things. If all we learn to do is a different way of management, well, that's fine. That's a good start. But if we're going to be successful, and this is for anybody, not just a young couple starting out, but even older couples or middle-aged couples that are maybe struggling or whatever, if we're going to be successful, we've got to run a ranch like a business, because it is a business. So understanding some business concepts and learning how to do some cash flow projections and some economic projections and different scenarios based on market situations and weather situations and that, and staying on top of that on a monthly basis, being able to plug numbers in. And if you don't want to do the day-to-day work of plugging numbers in the cash flow, at least being able to look at the cash flow and understand what it means and what it says, and when there's a discrepancy, being able to analyze that and realize, okay, we projected X and we got half X, what's going on here? And being able to make adjustments on the fly or sitting in the office and looking at things, okay, hey, we're off base here, things aren't going quite as we planned, and if we don't make a change, we're going to end up losing money or whatever that happens to be. So understanding those kinds of things, I think, is huge, because the bottom line is, and I don't want to say this in a derogatory way at all, but people that can go out and brand a calf or move cows or doctor a sick animal, they come a dime a dozen. And again, I don't mean that in any kind of derogatory way, but people that can look at ranching from a business perspective and really make good business decisions, those people don't come a dime a dozen. Those are a little far and fewer in between. So even if somebody, that wants to be in ranching and maybe raised on a ranch, they learn all the things about doctoring sick cattle and they learn that. So get some business experience, and some of that is sitting down with a good businessman or woman, and that may or may not be in ranching, but learning some business skills and then being able to take those principles, the business principle, and apply them to your own operation. That to me is what separates the men from the boys or the girls from the ladies, or however you want to word that. But that's what makes a big difference, being able to make those decisions and see those numbers and understand them and make competent decisions that will move the business forward. And that has to go beyond what all black cows, or I want my calves to weigh 750 pounds at weaning, or, I want a 95% conception rate, or whatever matrix we're looking at and goal we're shooting for that may or may not lead us to profitability. We need to understand the business side of it.
Mm-hmm. You bet. My guest today is Allan Crockett, business consultant, ranch consultant, business coach, and we're going to continue on. We're addressing a little bit here as we start the NextGen Ranchers. Just some thoughts and conversation with Allan on that as he's worked with different clients, other ranch families across the country, in helping them transition maybe to the next generation, as well as their current operation and how they can transition that and make that profitable in today's industry. We're going to continue on with him. A lot of great more conversation that we're going to have when we come back here on the Working Ranch Radio Show. This segment today brought to you by Barn Owl. It's what we use in our operation with 2 ranch locations. It's easy to keep an eye on things in both locations that you just don't have to go out and see every day unless there's a problem, and you can find that problem before it gets worse by using a Barn Owl camera, whether it's monitoring stock tanks, hay yards, your remote corrals, a variety of things, a gate, whatever that could be. Real-time awareness. It starts with Barn Owl, and it's all about peace of mind. You can build your off-grid camera system today by going to their website at barnowl.tech. Are you tired of putting the wear and tear on your ranch pickup, or your good side-by-side out checking stock tanks or reservoirs? Or maybe it's just keeping an eye on a remote ranch location. When you stop and you think about it and you start to calculate the cost of your time, fuel, and miles on your vehicles, you're going to scare yourself. But there really is a very simple and a reassuring solution, and it's called Barn Owl. Barn Owl off-grid cameras and smart alerts provide you that assurance, and there's no question it is a time and a money saver. From anywhere at any time, no Wi-Fi or power needed. Build your off-grid camera system today at barnowl.tech. Real-time awareness starts here. Always know with Barn Owl. Welcome back to the Working Ranch Radio Show. My guest today is Allan Crockett. And Allan, as we are talking, addressing a little bit the next-gen ranchers out there, again, I want to reemphasize, too, that as we have this conversation for those parents or decision makers that are on the place, there's conversation and bits and parts to this that I think are important for them to understand as well. Because I think, as we all know, and we've talked about it even in our last show, there's a real struggle in there when it comes to Junior out there wanting to come back to the ranch or come back to a place or be able to get there. And that's a real point in our industry. I mean, if you talk about one of the leading issues in an industry, Allan, don't you think that's kind of one of the things that always seems to come up?
Oh, all the time. And it's really interesting because out of those that want to successfully, transfer the ranch to the next generation, it's like 30% actually get that done. I mean, it's a very small percentage of those that want to do it to get it done. And so I think it's one of those things we have to be very, very transparent, and we have to have honest, open communication and dialogue. And it doesn't mean we sit down at family dinner, on a Sunday afternoon, we have the discussion, and Monday morning everything's great. This is a dialogue, but it's going to take some time, because if mom and dad are there and contemplating turning some of this over to Junior, or Junior's come back and he wants to take some of it and run with it, that's typically is not an overnight decision. It takes time to kind of structure that, and don't be surprised if some tears get shed in the process of doing that. So we have to be transparent. We have to have honest, open dialogue, communication, be able to make that happen.
Mm-hmm. So in the last segment, we were specifically talking about what would make the NextGen Rancher Junior a better operator in the future. And we were specifically hitting on learning those business skills. Well, if you, as you said, leave and learn and go somewhere else and learn some of that from someplace else, somewhere else that's a different mindset than maybe where you have been raised in. I want to go just a bit deeper because as you and I were talking before the break, I think even, and I'm going to almost put that in ahead of this to what we talked about in the last segment, and that is getting to a point to where you're a person of integrity. You're a person of honesty, of that you're running it. As you and I were talking about as an example, is run it like you own it. If you had to pay for that pickup, if you had to pay for that machinery or whatever that might be, but that all kind of comes in there together because I think that in itself is going to give you that ability then to take, once you have those business skills, you're going to be unstoppable.
Absolutely. But the personal integrity, you're right, it has to come on top of that because if we don't have that, obviously we're cheating ourselves, but we're cheating others, we're cheating our community. I mean, if we don't have personal integrity, and that could be a simple thing that it's hot outside and I'll go check waters, but I don't want to because it's too hot, or it's snowing outside and I should go chop ice, but I don't want to because it's too cold out. Those kinds of things, or well, I don't feel really good today, I think I'll just take the day off. That's where personal integrity comes in, that I'm going to go do those things and I'm going to take ownership of the stewardship that I've been given, whether that's a small stewardship or a large stewardship, but take complete ownership of that everything that happens in that stewardship is my responsibility and it falls on me and the buck stops here. And when we get to that point in life, well, we really do that, then I think we start seeing miracles and things start happening that wouldn't normally happen. I had a client one time, and he was an absentee owner, and he since died, but this was a cattle ranch, and he had some neighbors that were farmers that were taking care of his place for him. And he made the comment, he says, they're not the most competent when it comes to ranching and grazing and taking care of cows because they really are farmers, but he says they are people of integrity, and they're honest as the day is long. And he says, I know a guy in my area that is very, very good with cattle and that, but he has a reputation of not being honest. And I would rather have honesty and try to teach competency than have competency and try to teach honesty. And I think he nailed it. If you hire somebody that's not quite competent like you would like them to be, you can teach that as long as they're honest with themselves and willing to learn and commit. But if they're not honest, again, that doesn't mean they would be stealing cash from you or stealing gas out of your fuel tank or things like that. It's just maybe not honestly giving their all to, building the cows, building the grazing, building the business, doing things in a shortcut that they wouldn't do and that you wouldn't do, and they wouldn't do if it was their cows or their ranch, they wouldn't take that shortcut. Well, the problem is if they take the shortcut now, they'll probably take the shortcut if they own the place too. And then they end up upside down because they've taken too many shortcuts. And that could be upside down financially, it could be upside down ecologically, it could be upside down in their relationship with their spouse or their children or their landlord if they're leasing or anything. So absolutely, personal integrity has to come into play. And to me, that's ownership and it's based on principles. I've got a client, or mom and dad and the son, and went there one time. And I've been there a couple of times and had just been in the ranch office and doing planning and figuring out numbers and that kind of thing. And this time, mom and dad, I got there at the same time, but mom and dad were gone. And so the son and I took a little ride around the ranch, and I made the comment, I says, we drove into this pasture. I says, this shows the signs of low stock density continuous grazing. He says, what do you mean? And so we got out and we probably walked 100-yard radius around the pickup where we stopped. And I kept pointing out to him grass that was severely grazed down to the ground and the grass plat right next to it that hadn't been touched and some in between and just everywhere we looked. And, the son, he's in his mid-30s and made the comment. He says, I've lived here my whole life and I've never seen that. And the next morning when we met in the ranch office, the first words out of his mouth is, I want to stop the overgrazing and the undergrazing, and I want to fix that. And his parents looked at him, and they didn't know what he was talking about. They'd been there their whole lives. They hadn't really seen it. But I think that, going back to the first summit, getting someplace else where people do things a little bit different and seeing some things will help us see our own place better when we get it, whether that's the home place or we go out and lease or buy a place in some other geographic location, it will help us see things better when we've seen things that other people do. But to me, that personal integrity is, I see what your grazing does. I see what kind of grazing we have here. I want to fix that. That's personal integrity. Mm-hmm. Rather than, well, yeah, I see it, but I'm not going to change. I'm just going to keep doing things the way we've always done them because I don't want to bother with that. I don't want to mess with that. So if you know a correct principle and you choose to not live it, to me, that's a little lacking on the personal integrity side. So
mm-hmm. The book Code of the West has those 10 principles. Might not be a bad thing to throw out there as well. Those are very good. Okay, this is the part of the show where I want to bring mom and dad involved in it, because we've been talking about the NextGen Ranchers, and I want to bring mom and dad into part of this, because as we transition and make these transitions, and you talked about it when we came into this segment here, we talked about making that transition. And as you and I were talking before we went on air, I'd mentioned this was something I'd written down, and it comes to a point where mom and dad can't run the ranch forever, or whoever's the decision maker can't run the ranch forever, and they're faced with two options. You can either be proactive or you can be reactive in that. Your thoughts?
Absolutely. I think mom and dad need to very well be proactive. And I think it needs to happen long before they physically or mentally can't run the ranch anymore. We need to put those wheels in motion sooner rather than later. And part of that is the idea of stewardship that we just talked about. But this idea of stewardship, all right, well, let's turn some of this over to Junior, or son or daughter, doesn't make any difference which it is, but the one that's come back to the ranch, let's turn some of this over and give them either enough rope, they get the job done, or they hang themselves trying. And if they get the job done, all right, let's give them a little more rope. And when I say give them rope, it's basically we're giving them responsibility and setting them up, hopefully, for success in that responsibility. And if there's not success there, we're not meeting the targets, then we need to sit down and look at that and say, okay, what do I need to do as mom and dad? What training do I need to provide for my son or daughter so that they can properly assume the role? And I think sometimes we get stuck there, and maybe even mom and dad don't know what kind of training is available or what kind of training Junior needs to be able to step up. But without it, and without the open, honest dialogue and the transparency, we set ourselves up for failure, that either the next generation is going to fail or they don't want to come back because we don't want to turn loose. So being very proactive about that, but then really, really having dialogue. And again, this is not, I would not even do this at Sunday dinner. This would be, we're going to have a ranch meeting, and I'd recommend you do it off-site. Instead of time when you can get away from that. Almost all the strategic planning I do anymore, the number one requirement is we do it off-site. Mm-hmm. Because, I look out my window, you look out your window, and we can see 1,000 things that need to be done. Yeah. And I remember, one time, the guy was working, he looked out his window and, what are they doing here? He shouldn't be here right now. If there's a couple of employees have pulled in, so he's got to get up and leave the meeting and go see what's going on. So I would suggest that mom and dad are going to have those conversations with Junior, those family dialogues. Don't do it at family dinner. Don't do it at Thanksgiving or Christmas time. Do it, but set up a meeting and do it off-site and figure out a location and take a couple of days and initiate the process. And don't think you're going to come to a conclusion in a couple of days. You might, but it's probably going to take a few months to really, really think through that. And some people can get that done and some people can't. And if you try and you feel like you're beating your head against the wall, well, then get some outside help. Have a coach or a facilitator or somebody come in and work with you that has some experience with that kind of transition development program and bring them in. And it'll speed up the process typically.
Yeah. Well, let's take one more break here. And Alan, when we come back, we'll kind of tie all this together a little bit. We just got a short time in this next segment to do that. And I want to just kind of pull all this together and just some final walkaways that people can do as they come away from our conversation here today. We'll be back on the Working Ranch Radio Show after this.
Build a better herd with genomic EPDs for your commercial females. A cattleman is only as good as his tools. So add Inherit Select from Zoetis to your shoot side lineup to back your intuition and to help reveal the replacements with the potential to be the most productive and profitable in your herd. Keep the best. Sell the rest. Zoetis makes it easy. Order free supplies today so you can easily collect tissue samples when you work cattle this fall. Visit beefgenetics.com/working ranch to get started.
Welcome back to the Working Ranch Radio Show. My guest today is Allan Crockett, a ranch consultant business coach. And as we wrap all of our conversation up here today, initially, Allan, when we started talking, we're talking to the NextGen ranchers that are out there. In addition, in the last segment, we also were talking to the current decision makers on the ranch. And as we tie this all together, one of the things that you initially, as we were discussing this whole topic in our conversation here today, was it coming back and resting on mindset and where that's at for either of these groups that we're talking here today?
Absolutely, because if we're the mindset that, ranching is not profitable, you can't make money ranching, then that's a pretty tough road to hoe. So that has to be changed. I mean, people make money ranching, they do it all the time. It's just not the norm out there. The old joke, how do you make $1 million ranching? You start with $5 million. We need to overcome that kind of a mindset. So for mom and dad, and we're looking at the next generation, we have to have the mindset, number one, for ourselves, that there are things we want to do off ranch and we want to get away and enjoy retirement while we're young enough and healthy enough to do that. And so that has to be our mindset. And our mindset is, we are willing to turn this over to the next generation. And maybe we're not going to risk everything we've built in our life, but we're going to, there's going to be some risk. Maybe we lease it to them. Maybe we lease the cows down the ranch to the next generation for a while, and then maybe they buy the cows from them. I mean, there's all kinds of options there, things that we can do that won't hurt us long term as, the current decision makers, and yet allow the next generation to get started and have some decision-making authority. And then for the next generation, I think the mindset thing is there too, and that has to start with personal integrity, and then it has to come back to business, and then the rest of it, the day-to-day activities out on the ranch. But we've got to look at it from a personal integrity standpoint, and we have to look at it from a business perspective and make decisions based on good business information and good numbers. And then, let's go out and do the things we enjoy doing outside. And I'm all for that. But if we don't treat it like a business, if we don't run it like a business, if mom and dad don't make good business decisions, handing it to the next generation, whatever that handoff looks like, the mindset has to be the first. If we don't do that, then we set ourselves up for failure on both ends.
Mm-hmm. Allan, one of the things I want to wrap up with our conversation with you talking through this, and we had talked about it as well, and this could really hit a variety of folks that are listening, whether it's the next gen ranchers, maybe it's those that wanting to expand, whatever that might be, or it's even mom and dad, the decision makers on the place. But write it out. Put what you want out there. You'd mentioned that to me. Put it out there, what you want. And understanding there needs to be pure motives in that, because I don't think unpure motives are going to be blessed, to be quite honest with you. But at the same time, put it out there what you want. Maybe you're wanting to lease, you're wanting to expand, mom and dad, you're wanting to pass it on. I mean, so that concept of getting it down, maybe writing it out, having it on a piece of paper in your office or whatever that might be, but just do it. Just say it verbally.
Absolutely. And it's interesting you say that, because two different couples I've worked with here in the last year or so come to mind, and they're young couples that started from scratch. And both of them were talking about how hard it is to lease more land in their area. And both of them leased a place right across the fence from them this last year or two. And part of that being proactive, the change of mindset that, we can find some places. We don't know what those places are, what they'll look like. But then putting it out there, like you say, put it out there to the universe. Get on your knees and pray about it. Put it that way. But put it out there to the universe and let the powers that be know that, hey, this is what I want, and I really want it. And I'm ready to work for it. I'm ready to make it happen. And when we do that, it seems to me that doors open, and we just have to be wise enough to see the door that opened and take advantage of the open door without taking advantage of people, and have pure motives and do things with integrity. And I think when we do that, there are way more opportunities than what we would see normally.
That's a good way to put it. I don't know how to top off that, what you just said there at the end. So I think we'll just end our conversation with that, because I think what you just said there at the very end says an awful lot no matter who's listening, no matter where you're at. Maybe you're starting out, maybe you're in and out. It doesn't matter. I think what you said there makes a lot of sense. Alan, thanks so much for joining us here. I always appreciate our conversations, and my mind's always rolling to other topics and other things as we continue on. And if folks are interested in reaching out to you, as I've said, we've had you on the show here before. You are a ranch consultant, you are a business coach. Maybe it's the direction that you want somebody to come and mediate a family meeting or mediate some of your situations. How would they get a hold of you?
520-253-0040. Text me or leave a message, because if I'm on an interview with Justin, or if I'm with a client, I won't answer the phone, but leave me a message, shoot me a text. I will get back with you. Occasionally I'm out of service for a couple of days, but I will return a call or a text message or an email. I think you put the email in the show notes or something, and easier that way. But yeah, reach out to me. We can have a discussion. The discussion is complimentary, without obligation, and you can see if it's a good fit. If I think it's a good fit and you do, then we'll talk about it. If I don't or you don't, then we got to know each other for a few minutes, and we go our own way.
You bet. And if you're down around, of course, you're out of Wilcox, Arizona, which is a little east of Tucson, south and east of Tucson a bit. But if you're in the Tucson area, give him a call, and I'm sure he'd meet up with you down there as well. So, Alan, again, thanks for joining us here today on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Thank you, Justin. Always a pleasure.
You bet. And a great conversation here today, as I said a moment ago, for anybody in the industry, no matter where you're at. Hopefully some nuggets of information and things that you can think through as well. I know for myself, some of our conversation a bit convicting to some of the things that I need to look at in my own operation as well. Like Alan said, I will put a link to his email address in our show notes on his name. It's a hyperlink. You can click on that and go right into his email, and you can get a hold of him through that method also. Stay with us after the break. We're going to switch gears as we talk equipment maintenance. Aaron Booth with New Holland will be stepping in, joining us. We'll be back after this.
Capitalize on crossbreeding with Geld V and Balancer bulls. Raise replacement females with added fertility, increased longevity, and greater productivity. Geld V and Balancer influenced females wean more pounds of calf per cow exposed. In the feed yard, Balancer influenced cattle offer increased performance, improved feed efficiency, and have excellent carcass merit. Balancers add the pounds, make the grade, and deliver the value. Make your crossbreeding count with Geld V and Balancer genetics.
And joining us now here on the Working Ranch Radio Show is Aaron Booth, Manager of Product Marketing for New Holland Parts and Services. And Aaron, thanks for joining us here today on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Thanks for having me.
Well, as we were talking before we went on air, a little bit about this time of the year. A lot of folks, if you got much hay and equipment, you're putting stuff back in the barn and maybe getting things serviced or ready to go for the next year and doing those kinds of things. In addition, for us as ranchers that might have to put a little hay out from time to time, those tractors are still going to be kind of in operation. But when we get to this, one of the things is that maintenance element that needs to continue. We don't talk a lot about equipment here on our program, but we all do have it, and it is something that we need to be aware of in terms of that maintenance. And so I think one of the things to start off with is talking about oil changes and getting the best performance out of this equipment and being on a regular schedule with these oil changes.
Yeah. So, whether it's something you're going to put away for the winter that you're primarily using on the haying equipment, or it's something you're going to just about use year round, kind of having that maintenance schedule built out. So if it's something you're putting away, it's a good idea to kind of do that while you're thinking of it, while you got it out, so that when you get it out the next season, it's ready. Mm-hmm. If it's something you're going to be using all winter, it's a little more straightforward, right? You've got a service interval that would be called out in your operator's manual, and really using the using that OEM fluid is making sure you actually are using a product that's tested to go for those service intervals, because all of that OEM, whether it's engine oil, whether it's hydraulic oil, it's been tested to make sure it's holding up, which is important for both. But, when you're talking engine oil, oxidation, the type of usage, those engines, stress it's putting on that oil it's unique, right? A lot of oil that's out there that you can get at a lot of different places. Mm-hmm. It's pretty much built for on-road trucks and heavy-duty diesel type usage, but not necessarily, making hay or running high RPM equipment, whereas all that OEM New Holland engine oil is tested and meant to hold up over time in that sort of equipment.
Mm-hmm. Two things I'm thinking of here real quick. I want to hit one thing, and that is with folks that are listening out there, we have a variety of folks because we've got ones that probably run maybe newer equipment, but then we also, and even folks that run newer equipment probably have some older equipment as well. So let's just talk about that oil maintenance from the perspective of, I think we can understand from a new machine standpoint how important that is. But let's talk about these old machines and the oil change and the maintenance on those to keep them running.
Yeah, it's, the older machines, the tolerance and the, emissions controls aren't exactly there. The newer machine, it's very critical that you're using the right kind of oil. You can get away with less for that, kind of the older the equipment is, but for the difference in price and for the convenience of it, it makes a lot of sense just to keep one sort of oil for managing your old fleet. And it's not like it is something that's going to still extend the life of that older piece of equipment, which it'll kind of all fail on you at once, on an older tractor. But it makes a lot of sense to use there while it's, even if it isn't as critical.
The second question I was thinking of is in regards to the viscosity of the oil with this machine that you're using and over its lifespan. How important is it to maintain the same type of viscosity oil from start to finish through this machine's lifespan?
I think it's important to use one that's not going to lose that viscosity prematurely. So, whether you're using 1540, and it's not a problem to switch to like a semi-synthetic. It's only going to potentially extend your service intervals, particularly on a piece of equipment that's getting high usage. That's not an issue. It's really making sure you're just using the quality OEM oil where you're not going to lose viscosity as you're having in a piece of equipment.
Okay. All right, let's switch to another subject here, and that is one of the other things is even in normal usage of the equipment to putting equipment away for the wintertime. But let's talk about grease and bearings and those things. Can we overgrease bearings?
You can overgrease, a sealed bearing. Certainly, you want to make sure you're not, pushing a seal out, by putting too much grease in. Typically, it's going to tell you in the operator's manual kind of what to look for, to say it's full. Most bearings, though, it's going to have a place to escape, and you can't really overgrease those to where, you just keep putting it in until you see it coming out somewhere else. So
always seems like to me like the part where it comes out is where you see it the last. So you're pumping away, and all of a sudden, it's like, oh, there it is.
Yes, and where you'll lean against the next time you go by it. Right? So
exactly. So along those same lines, though, I think it's important to know where your grease points are on that equipment, because sometimes you can forget or not see some of those places are underneath and in places that you aren't as easy to get to. And if you don't know where all the grease points are on that piece of equipment, you could miss something and really cause a problem down the road.
Yeah, certainly. And I think that's why it's good to be part of a daily routine. You know exactly how many points you need to grease. Typically, there is a sticker there. If it's gone, if it's missing, you can go get a sticker to make sure or a decal to make sure you're kind of highlighting all those grease points, particularly if you've got hired help doing it for you, that okay, there's 15 grease points on this tractor, making sure to kind of hit every one of them each day. Mm-hmm. Because you're right, it's real easy for time to get away, and you forget to do that on those harder to reach ones.
Okay, so here's a question that I've had when we start talking about grease and the different types of grease, because I'm like, okay, well, which, I've got a trencher that we use. It's, of course, a lot of rotations, a lot of movement in the moving parts of that one. Some pieces of equipment we have doesn't have as much movement in there, but should I be using lithium grease or the red grease? Tell me kind of the difference and which I should be using.
Yeah, a lot of times the difference in the grease is just whatever additive has put in there to make it work the way it's designed to by the engineers that are determining that. Typically, it's that multi-purpose grease is going to fit in most places. Again, that's you should be wearing out your operator's manual with a tractor or going online, because it's gonna call out specifically what you need to be using, and you really can trust that. Things change over time if you're talking about an older piece of equipment, but I would say grease has been pretty stable, and if you follow that, you're going to do okay.
Mm-hmm. Real quick, I want to go back to the oil thing because you had mentioned something a bit ago about it might be something to where you're using the same type of oil across all your equipment that you have. So that's getting into the question I've got here regarding buying oil in bulk. Your thoughts on that? I mean, what's that break-even point or that point we should be looking at where maybe it's a better investment we should be buying in bulk?
Yeah, I think if you're between one or two types of oil, if you're going through, say, 250 gallons or so a year, it makes a lot of sense to be buying in bulk. Price-wise, it's always going to be the best way to purchase, but it's just a matter of you purchasing, what you can use in 6 months to a year or what it's going to take you 3 years to use. There's no reason to buy ahead. I mean, the real advantage other than price is that the packaging that you don't have to deal with, right? Even if it's a drum, those kind of collect up over time. And while you can find a lot of different usage for old oil drums, it's even better to have that tank. You're not wasting any product on kind of what you can't get out of the bottom of it. You're refilling it and not wasting so much material to get that oil to your tractor.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to ask you a specific question regarding, as you are the product and marketing for New Holland Parts and Services. So is it important to use New Holland lubricant for my New Holland products, equipment?
It is. I mean, it's obviously there's lots of options out there. There's lots of choices. Lots of them have good reputations, but there's only one kind of product, New Holland product, that's actually been tested and validated and certified to work in that equipment. Mm-hmm. Will something else work? We don't know. No one really knows. It's an assumption, and for the investment of that tractor and of your operation and of the equipment you have, it doesn't make a lot of sense to even risk it.
So what I hear you saying, Aaron, on that basically is that is the oil that you've tested with your equipment is basically what it's getting down to.
Yes. Yeah. And if it didn't meet the standards that it needs to for the type of environment that those tractors are working in, we change it, right? We'd be doing something different. So it's something that we can stand behind and we know it's going to work as it needs to.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we're going to totally switch out of the subject of lubricants because that was mainly what we're going to talk about here today. But off air, you were telling me about a new product that New Holland has out regarding net wrap. And then we're going to tie it back in because it's into maintenance, and we'll get to that in a bit. But it's a compostable, not combustible. It's a compostable net wrap. Quickly give us the lowdown on that.
Yeah, it's called Nature's Net Wrap, and so it's a new company out of Canada, and they make 4 sizes: 48-inch, 51-inch, 64-inch, and 67-inch. So for 4-foot and 5-foot bales, and it's a net wrap that'll work in really any brand of round baler out there, and it's made so that once you cut that net wrap off the bale and kind of integrate it into the soil to fairly quickly degrade over time. So you're not having that plastic buildup in your soil, which can cause other issues. But while you're storing your round bales, it's made to not really degrade because of rain or UV or anything else. It really takes being put into the soil before it'll start to compost.
Mm-hmm. And the second question you're going to get on that, and I asked you the same thing, is can you feed it to a cow?
That's something that's being tested and studied right now. It's not recommended to, but more to come on that.
Yeah.
But certainly see the value and not having to even take it out of the hay.
Yeah. So and where we tie back to maintenance, folks, on this as Aaron and I were joking a little bit before, is what will I do? I won't have anything to cut out of the axles of my side by side or the tractor or things like that, which is a maintenance thing. So I won't have to cut those out.
Yeah, and that's the number one thing we're hearing of people that are really excited about this product is the amount of money and time they're spending to keep that from happening. So either it's happening and they're having to fix things, or they're paying people to kind of go walk through their fields to pick up that plastic. So there's certainly, this is a new product. There's certainly a premium to just regular plastic net wrap to buy this product, but you compare it to the expense that gets incurred based on the damage that plastic net wrap can do in your equipment or just to dispose of it, and the difference isn't as significant.
Yeah, having to replace a few bearings, and pretty soon you figure out that maybe it'd be a little better to look at something different. So, Aaron, if folks are interested in learning more about equipment lubrication, where would they go to find more information?
A good first stop is your local New Holland dealer. If not there, you can go online to New Holland parts store, and there's lots of information available on lubricants and everything else, really.
All right. Well, Aaron, appreciate you joining us here on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Thank you.
You bet. And again, that was Aaron Booth with New Holland joining us here today on the program. Just some basic things to be thinking about with our equipment maintenance, because it's like the rule of thumb. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And when it comes to your machinery, good maintenance and the right types of fluids and grease and lubricants that you use in those are awfully critical. Stay with us. Coming up after the break, the Captain Tim O'Byrne will be in. He is editor of Working Ranch Magazine. We'll hear from him in this week's edition of Tim's 2 Cents. And we'll also later on hear from meteorologist Don Day with a look at our long-term weather.
Fascinated by our wild weather? Now you can learn, appreciate, and understand the weather in your own backyard with the new Tropo Rain Gauge. Having achieved the highest rating of any product reviewed by the weatherstationexperts.com, the Tropo boasts rugged durability, impeccable accuracy, and precision to the 100th of an inch. Visit measurerain.com to order a Tropo today and use code RAINDAY. That's RAINDAY for free shipping and 10% off. Go to measurerain.com.
Hey, Justin. Hey, everybody out there in Working Ranch Radioland. Man, it's coming up on Thanksgiving week. This is one of my favorite times of the year. Everybody gets together, and wow, do we have a lot of things to be thankful for in our lives. Me personally, my lovely wife, Christine, who's been with me. We're having our anniversary here coming up in a week, 39 years. And she married a big outfit cowboy, and that's not an easy thing to do, ladies. And she made it through all that, and here we are. I am thankful for my health and my faith and living in this amazing country. And I am very thankful for you, Justin, and the radio show, and you're coming up on 1 million downloads here pretty quick. And I'm very thankful for Working Ranch Magazine and you people that are listening and the readers. You have been so, so gracious and loyal to us over the years. I couldn't be more thankful. God bless everybody out there. Have a great, safe Thanksgiving, and God bless America.
All right. Thanks, Captain. Appreciate that. And, you were talking about you and Christine just getting ready to celebrate your anniversary. Congratulations to you two, and especially to Christine for putting up with you for 37 years. No, but in all seriousness, folks, I'll tell you what, Working Ranch Magazine is what it is today because of the Captain and the years that he's put into this and bringing it to one of the most premier ranching publications, informational publications that's out there, and a big thanks to him as well. Well, as we turn now and take a look at our long-term weather, standing by is meteorologist Don Day. And Don, I guess I feel kind of fortunate that our fall here has been somewhat mild. Now, granted, it hasn't been that case exactly for everyone. I do know that big storm that hit into Colorado and across from there south and over into as far over into Texas as well, that was pretty significant. But for the most part, it's been a fairly mild fall without any long and prolonged deep storms or cold spells that we could have had or we have seen in the past.
Not yet, but we did get a sign that things are changing with the two storms that we had last week. One that really hit the coast of Washington, Oregon, and Northern California with a lot of wind and rain and heavy mountain snows. And then finally, we got some precipitation in the Great Lakes in the northeastern United States. Those two storms were the kind of storms that you do tend to see where the seasons start to change. And that's exactly what we're going to see unfolding as we go now through the rest of November into early December. A readjustment, so to speak, in the jet stream is taking place. And while it's been relatively mild across a lot of the lower 48 states for the fall season, when you don't have a lot of cold this late in the season, you got to remember somewhere else is the opposite. And that opposite area where those higher latitudes, as you'd expect, where the cold air has kind of gotten bottled up. But when it gets bottled up, it expands and it grows. And so what'll happen as we get into the last days of November and into the first week of December, I think a lot of the nation from the northern Rockies, the northern plains, into the Midwest, Corn Belt, Great Lakes region, it's going to see some pretty chilly air move in, and it's basically the initiation of winter. And I think it may be catching some folks off guard because it's such the warm fall that we had.
Mm-hmm. So how are things tracking in light of what you had forecasted when we had our previous show where you came on for the entire episode and we talked about what the fall and winter outlook would look like for 24 and 25? What are things looking like based upon what you were forecasting then?
Yeah, things are evolving about as expected, which was a slow start, a warm fall, and then all of a sudden we would be getting ourselves into a winter pattern that would have some staying power. And that's really what we see evolving. We see a pattern developing out in the Pacific, which is very conducive for cold air masses to have easy access out of Canada into the lower 48 states, especially the northern tier and a lot of the nation's midsection where these cold fronts make more visits. One thing that's happened over the last couple of weeks is we've seen snow accumulate across the prairie provinces of Canada. And November snow in that part of the world tends to stay. And when you get a lot of snow cover in those prairie provinces of Canada, that allows the cold fronts and the cold air masses coming in from the northwest that pack a little bit more punch as that cold air goes over those snow fields. So I guess what we're seeing is, to your point, is the evolving of the colder pattern that we thought would start about when it's starting. And that's really here over the next week to 10 days. And we see this signal continuing into January and February as well.
Mm-hmm. Don, are there any areas of the country that have caught the weather models by surprise in what had been anticipated when we talked about this a month or so ago?
Well, I have to tell you, those Southern Plains, Southern Rockies storm, not one model correctly predicted in advance the type of storms that we saw in New Mexico and parts of eastern Colorado, and the very wet weather that evolved in Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas. That just didn't see that. So that's a little bit of something that we did not see coming. And quite honestly, that kind of goes against with a La Nina pattern as well. So we'll have to kind of go back and do a post-analysis on that. But other than that, I think things have gone about as expected. And the new change now in the weather pattern is for a lot more winter now and a lot less fall.
Okay. Before we go, just one more thing. In another area of the country, we talked about this a little bit last week, and that was the northeastern part of the continental United States had been in a pretty dry condition. What is transpiring up there, and what do you anticipate going forward?
Yeah. Now, this recent storm that went through the Great Lakes did bring significant rain, 1 to 2 inches worth to many areas of that dry part of the northeastern United States, as well as some pretty significant snow in the northeast mountains of the U.S. And I think that's the start of a weather pattern change that looks more wet for those areas as well.
You bet. All right. Well, Don, appreciate the update, and we look forward to talking to you next week.
See you then.
All right. And again, that is meteorologist Don Day with a look at our long-term weather. If you want to tune in each and every morning to his daily video podcast, you can find a link to his YouTube channel at dayweather.com. Coming up on next week's edition of the Working Ranch Radio Show, Jess Peterson will be joining us on the program as we'll be talking with him on his thoughts regarding post-election and President-elect Trump's cabinet picks and other elements that would affect agriculture back in Washington, D.C., the Senate, the House, all of those kind of details. Look forward to having that conversation with Jess on that. Be sure to join us next week here on the Working Ranch Radio Show. By the way, the latest copy and issue of Working Ranch Magazine is out. And if you want to get a subscription to the magazine, it's pretty simple. You can go to the website at workingranchmag.com to get started. Quick thank you to our sponsors here today: Barn Owl Cameras, the American Galvy Association, Cowpuncher Coffee, Inherent Select from Zoetis, and Tang Tobe. The Working Ranch Radio Show is a production of Working Ranch Magazine, branded #1 by America's Ranchers. If you'd like to get a hold of me, you can do it by sending me an email at justin.workingranch@gmail.com. If you got an idea for a show, topics, or questions you'd like us to cover, feel free to shoot me an email. Thanks for joining us this week. Be sure to tune in next week at this same time, same place, or on your favorite podcast provider. I'm Justin Mills, and until next time, keep your chin down and your mind in the middle. So long.